Welcome to our channel. Dear Santa, please send me a dad. This letter ended up on the desk of a lonely billionaire, but in this version of the story, the request was far more specific, and the recipient was a man whose heart had been frozen for years. Winter wrapped Chicago in its sharpest. Cold winds sliced through narrow streets, sweeping fallen snow into corners like forgotten memories. It was the kind of cold that settled in the lungs and stayed there. 16-year-old Johnny Hopkins pulled his hoodie tighter, his breath fogging the fabric as he coughed, a dry, persistent sound that never left him when the weather turned. His thin hands were jammed deep into his pockets. As he walked beside his father, Anthony Hopkins walked briskly, his posture hunched against the wind. At 32 he was slim with dark hair that was always slightly messy, though he tried to keep it neat. His coat was far too thin for the temperature, but he never complained. He worked 2 jobs, cleaning hospital offices at night and stocking shelves at a hardware store on weekends. Whatever money he had went toward rent, groceries, and Johnny's medication for his chronic respiratory issues. Their apartment sat on the 5th floor of a rundown building near the Elra tracks. It was one room with a partitioned sleeping area, a flickering space heater that barely worked, and a drafty window. Nights were cold and quiet, except for Johnny's cough and the soft hum of the city below. Every Friday before his shift at St. Jude's Medical Center, Anthony stopped outside a diner and let Johnny sit by the window for a moment before he had to head to the hospital library to do homework. Inside the diner, families laughed, teenagers shared milkshakes, and fathers clapped their sons on the shoulder. Johnny never asked to go in, he just watched his reflection ghostly in the foggy glass, his chest rising with soft wheezes. He never said a word, but Anthony saw the longing in his son's eyes, and it made him ache. That night, back home, Johnny couldn't stop thinking about how his father's smiles always faded too quickly. He wasn't old, but his eyes looked older than anyone Johnny knew. While Anthony boiled water for instant oatmeal, Johnny sat at the small, designated homework desk, coughing. When his father wasn't looking, he reached for a piece of lined paper from his notebook, grabbed a pen, and began to write. Dear Santa, please send a partner for my dad, not for me but for him. I think he's lonely. He needs someone to take care of him for a change. Love, Johnny Hopkins, Dad, Anthony. Beneath the words, he didn't draw a stick figure picture like a child. Instead, he sketched a quick, talented outline of 3 people, a tall man, his father, and a teenager in a hoodie. Between them, they were standing close, looking peaceful. He folded the letter fully, tucked it into his backpack, and waited for the right moment. He knew he was too old for Santa, but he figured the universe might be listening if he put it in writing. The next day, Anthony took Johnny with him to the hospital early because the heating in their apartment had gone out completely. The sky was still gray, the wind harsher. Johnny coughed almost the whole way. Anthony had no choice. He couldn't leave him in the freezing apartment at the hospital. While Anthony went to the supply closet, Johnny wandered into the main lobby. He spotted a sleek, modern box labeled holiday wishes and suggestions for the hospital administration. To Johnny, it looked like the only mailbox that mattered right. Now he glanced around, pulled the letter from his backpack, and slipped it into the slot. He whispered, "Please find him." Anthony turned the corner just as Johnny walked back, ready to go to the waiting area. "Bud?" Anthony asked. "Yeah," Johnny said, smiling small. Anthony squeezed his shoulder, unaware that the letter had just disappeared into a box that would soon change their lives. Monday morning, on the top floor of the administrative wing, Dr. Adrian Thorne sat at his mahogany desk as the chief of surgery and a major donor to the hospital. He was brilliant, sharp-suited beneath his signature charcoal gray coat, and emotionally distant. He sifted through a pile of printed feedback left by his assistant. He reviewed the notes with mechanical focus. Most were the same: complaints about parking, requests for better coffee, staffing grievances. Then, between two formal complaints, a piece of notebook paper fluttered down. Unofficial, handwritten. He frowned and opened it. "Dear Santa, please send a partner for my dad." He froze. "Love, Johnny Hopkins, Dad." Anthony Hopkins. The name hit him like a sudden jolt. Months earlier, during a small chemical spill in the laundry sub, a member of the cleaning staff had saved a senior nurse, pulling her out, staying calm, and sealing the room. He refused any reward. Adrian remembered going down himself and seeing him stood on his cheek, hands red from the cold water, dark hair falling. In his eyes, his gaze steady. Anthony Hopkins, now his son, had written to Santa, not for video games, but for a partner for his father. Adrian stared at the sketch at the bottom of the page. 3 figures standing together. Something caught in his chest. Outside his window, snow had begun to fall soft and slow. He held the letter. He didn't smile, didn't speak, but he didn't put it down either. For the first time in years, something inside him whispered, "Don't ignore this." The office was quiet, the early winter sun barely piercing through the tall glass windows. Dr. Thorne sat at his desk, staring at the letter. Most submissions were typed and stapled. This was folded and tucked. Messily, he read the line again. "I think he's lonely." His chest tightened. He leaned back in his chair, blinking hard. A memory surfaced. Adrian at 16. Sitting in a boarding school dorm alone. Over Christmas, wishing someone would come for him. He hadn't believed in Santa then, but he had believed in the pain of solitude. And now, 30 years later, another boy had placed that same hope in a box in his lobby. Coincidence? Maybe, but it didn't feel that way. Adrian looked again at the letter. The handwriting was messy, but purposeful. This was a teenager fully aware of the world, yet desperate enough to wish. Something stirred in him, not obligation, not guilt, but something else. He found himself wondering, why is Anthony still struggling like this? Why does his son feel the need to wish for something so fundamental? Adrian didn't believe in fate. He believed in diagnosis, treatment, and outcomes. But this letter was not a medical chart. It was personal. He placed the sketch back down on his desk. There was no hospital protocol for this, but he knew one thing: he could not ignore it. Adrian stared out at the snowy skyline for a long time. Then he said under his breath, "Johnny Hopkins, Anthony Hopkins, I need to know more." Anthony Hopkins's days blurred together like the gray winter sky. His shift started in the late afternoon and ended well past midnight. He barely spoke to the doctors and nurses, and he barely slept, but he always smiled when he saw Johnny, his son, was usually waiting in the 24-hour break room wrapped in a blanket, doing homework or sketching. As Anthony removed his work gloves, he would hear Johnny cough softly at first, then in short bursts that made the boy lean against the table to steady his breath. "Dad, I'm okay," Johnny would say, rubbing his eyes. "You don't have to look so worried." Anthony would kneel down fixing Johnny's hoodie. "I'm always worried, Tobbs, it's my job." But the warmth in his voice couldn't hide the fatigue in his eyes. At work, Anthony moved like a shadow, efficient, invisible. He greeted people politely but never lingered. He volunteered for extra shifts and stayed silent when others complained. "He's kind," a nurse once said, "but it's like he's carrying a whole world we can't see." Anthony didn't mind being invisible until one small moment made him seen. That day, the cafeteria was quiet when Anthony picked up a coffee and a sandwich for his break. As he turned toward a table, he tripped over a loose floor mat. The tray slipped, crashing loudly to the floor. The room went still. A few residents nearby exchanged looks, some laughing softly. Anthony said nothing. He dropped to his knees, picking up the mess with shaking hands. Dr. Adrian Thorne walked by in his impeccable gray coat. He paused. He didn't speak, didn't help immediately, but his eyes lingered on Anthony for a beat longer than usual, noting the grace with which Anthony handled the humiliation. Later that week, their worlds quietly touched. Again, Johnny had coughed through the night. He had a mild fever, and school wasn't an option. With no one to help, Anthony brought him to the hospital, asking permission for Johnny to stay in the quiet lounge near the surgical wing. He wrapped him in a blanket and handed him his sketchbook. Johnny promised to be quiet. Adrian was walking through the wing on his rounds when he noticed a figure sitting alone, a teenager with messy hair drawing on his knees, a thick scarf wrapped around his neck. He coughed into his sleeve, eyes focused. Adrian slowed his steps. The boy looked up and offered a polite, raspy, "Hi, doctor." Adrian blinked, surprised. He sat on the bench across from him. "What's your name?" he asked. Johnny Hopkins." The world tilted just slightly. Adrian's gaze dropped to the drawing. "Three figures. What are you drawing?" "Me and my dad and someone else. I don't know who yet, but my dad needs him." And Adrian couldn't answer. He could barely breathe. Anthony appeared at the door, breathless and looking terrified. "I'm so sorry, Dr. Thorne. I'll take him out." Adrian stood, his expression uncharacteristically soft. "It's all right, let him rest. It's warm in here." Anthony hesitated, then nodded, getting Johnny's hand back to the sketchbook. Adrian walked away, but something in him stayed behind. Back in his office, he opened Johnny's letter again. It was real. He unfolded the drawing inside the letter. It matched the style of the one the boy had been sketching. Same three figures, same warmth, same longing. He knew who the boy was, and he knew who the father was, and he knew quietly that he couldn't walk away. He was no longer observing from a distance. He had stepped gently, unexpectedly, into their story. Since that day, Adrian started noticing things he never had before. The staff lounge for evening cleaning staff was too cold and too dim. He had facilities checked the heating units and quietly approved a small budget increase for better furniture and coffee machines. No one knew that the order came directly from the chief of surgery. The next step came more deliberately. That Saturday, the hospital hosted its Community Warmth Initiative, distributing meals and flu shots to the homeless downtown. Usually PR reps and interns signed up, but this year, Adrian made a personal request to one employee, Anthony Hopkins. He said, catching him in the hallway, "You stay calm in emergencies. I want people like you out there, not just the cameras." Anthony blinked, surprised, but nodded. Of course, Dr. Thorne. That morning, Anthony arrived with Johnny bundled beside him. The teen held tightly to his father's arm, a slight cough still lingering. Adrian met them outside the medical van. His voice was low, his gaze kind as he looked at them. "Good morning, Johnny." Johnny gave a shy wave. "Hi again." Anthony smiled politely, unsure what to make of the chief of surgery knowing his son's name. As the volunteers passed out meals, Adrian watched the father and son. Anthony moved with quiet confidence, treating every person with dignity. Johnny helped too, handing out water bottles. Midway through the morning, the wind picked up, and Johnny began shivering, coughing into his elbow. Adrian wordlessly slipped off his heavy, expensive gray wool coat and wrapped it gently around Johnny's shoulders. "This is better than your hoodie. It blocks the wind." Anthony moved to object. "Sir, he's okay." Adrian gave a small shake of his head. "I had the same cough when I was his age. Trust me." Anthony's eyes met his. Something uncertain flickered in his face. Then he simply said, "Thank you." After the event, Adrian suggested they stop for dinner, not a formal restaurant, just a quiet burger place nearby. Johnny's eyes lit up. "Can we get fries?" Anthony hesitated, looking at his budget in his mind. Adrian nodded. "My treat, I insist." The three of them sat in a booth under soft lights. Johnny chattered more than usual, telling Adrian about his art and how he used to think doctors were all scary robots. Adrian laughed, genuinely, a sound even he hadn't heard in a long time. Anthony watched something about the way Adrian listened to Johnny, how he answered each question with patience. It unsettled him in the best way. When the food came, Johnny grinned. "Dad, this is great." Anthony smiled, still adjusting to the strange warmth of it all. Adrian, sensing his hesitation, shared a story. "I spent a Christmas in the hospital once as a resident. The vending machine was my dinner. I would have killed for a burger like this." Anthony looked down, then slowly back up, his expression shifting from guarded to curious. "You seem different than at the hospital, Dr. Thorne," Anthony said softly. "Please call me Adrian." The doctor replied. On the ride home, Adrian offered his car to drop them off. This time, Anthony said yes. As they reached their building, Adrian stepped out and crouched slightly to look Johnny in the eye. "If Santa really exists," he asked softly, "and he sent your wish to someone, do you think he chose the right person?" Johnny studied him, then smiled. "I think maybe he did." He reached out and fist bumped Adrian. Anthony stood still, his heart caught in his throat. He didn't speak, but something in his eyes answered the question Adrian hadn't dared to ask Anthony directly. Anthony had always drawn careful lines between himself and the world around him. he had. Too survival required focus, but lately, something had begun to shift. Johnny spoke of Adrian the way teenagers spoke of heroes, with a cool, detached admiration that hid deep affection. "Dad, he's actually cool," Johnny said one morning. "He doesn't look at us like we're charity." Anthony blinked, caught off guard. He had no answer. No one had looked at him with anything other than indifference in years. Adrian, on the other hand, had already crossed the line. Anthony didn't know he had drawn. Quietly, methodically, without announcement, he had begun to care. When Adrian reviewed employee health screenings and saw Anthony flagged for high stress and markers of malnutrition, something inside him pulled taut. He called a colleague, a trusted specialist, and arranged a discreet medical checkup for Anthony, framing it as a mandatory staff wellness check. The doctor simply said to Anthony, "There's someone looking out for you." Anthony walked home afterward, vitamins in one hand and something unspoken in the other, but it was the phone call late one Friday night that made everything real. Johnny had been coughing more that day. By nightfall, his chest was tight, and his breathing had grown shallow and rapid. Anthony checked his peak flow meter. It was dangerously low. Panic rose in his chest. He knew the ER wait times were hours long. He scrolled through his contacts and paused on one name he had been given in case of emergency after the volunteer event. Adrian Thorne. His thumb hovered, then pressed call. He answered on the first ring. "I'm on my way." No questions, no hesitation. 20 minutes later, Adrian's luxury car pulled up. Anthony stood on the curb supporting Johnny, who was wheezing painfully. Adrian took one look at the boy and helped him into the back seat, sitting beside him to monitor his breathing while the driver sped towards St. Jude's. On the drive, the car was silent except for Johnny's struggle for air. Adrian finally spoke, his voice low. "I grew up with severe asthma. My father was never around. I remember being terrified. The back of a taxi alone. I won't let Johnny feel that way." Anthony looked at him. Adrian's hands were steady as he checked Johnny's pulse, but his voice held something fragile. At the hospital, Adrian bypassed the waiting room. He had a room ready. Johnny was stabilized quickly with nebulizers and steroids. His breathing eased, and he fell asleep. Exhausted, Anthony sat beside him, drained, his head in his hands. Adrian pulled up a chair on the other side. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Somewhere after midnight, Anthony drifted off, and so did Adrian. When Johnny opened his eyes hours later, he saw them, his dad and the man with the gray coat, both asleep in uncomfortable chairs, leaning toward him. Johnny blinked, then reached out and took their hands, pulling them closer. "Dad," he whispered, "I told Santa I didn't want anything else." Adrian stirred. He opened his eyes and looked at Anthony. Anthony was already awake, watching Johnny with tears quietly welling. Neither spoke, but as their hands rested near Johnny's on the bed sheet, Adrian reached out slowly, gently, and took Anthony's hand in his. Anthony didn't pull away, and in that quiet hospital room, with snow still falling outside, something wordless passed between the two men. Not a promise, but a beginning. Anthony had always believed that resilience meant surviving quietly, but ever since that winter night, he began to realize that Strength looked a lot like letting someone stay as Johnny's health stabilized. Adrian approached Anthony with a proposition. It was not a handout but an opportunity. He invited Anthony to join a new program for patient advocacy and support, a role designed to bridge the gap between medical staff and families. I need someone who understands what it means to be scared and confused. In a hospital, Adrian said, his voice calm but sincere. I don't need a medical degree yet. I need empathy. I need you. Anthony hesitated. He looked down at his hands, rough from years of manual labor. I haven't been in a classroom in 15 years, he admitted. Adrian didn't flinch. He simply smiled. Then maybe it's time to go back. The hospital will sponsor your certification. The chain was quiet but meaningful. Anthony began working days in the new department, wearing a badge that didn't say janitorial. Johnny, healthier now, started drawing fewer dark sketches and more portraits of the three of them. One weekend, the hospital organized a team building retreat. Adrian insisted Anthony come. They ended up on the same team for the Triangle Challenge, a game requiring 3 people to synchronize movements to solve puzzles. Johnny, who was allowed to participate as a family member, laughed as he directed them. Adrian's quiet steadiness kept Anthony grounded. When Johnny slipped on a patch of ice, it was Adrian who rushed forward to catch him, steadying him with surprising tenderness. That evening, as they drank cocoa by a fire pit, Johnny leaned into his father's side. Dad, if someone has 2 people who care about them, is that a family? Anthony blinked, his heart caught in his chest. He ran his fingers through Johnny's hair. Yes, Tobbs, that's exactly what it means. A few days later, Adrian sent Anthony a handwritten invitation. It was tucked into Johnny's backpack. You're invited to. It was for the hospital's year-end donor gala. The line at the bottom read, no dress code, just bring the person you love most. For a long time, Anthony considered not going. Those events were for doctors and wealthy donors, but Johnny begged, please, Dad, let's go. We'll be together. Anthony walked into the hall that evening in a simple black suit he had bought from a thrift store, tailored to fit perfectly. He expected glances, maybe whispers, but when Adrian turned and saw him, his eyes didn't flinch. He walked over, not with fanfare, but with quiet purpose. Johnny made his wish, Adrian said, standing close enough that Anthony could smell his expensive cologne mixed with the winter air. He chose you. I'm just hopping I get to stand near that wish for a while longer. Anthony didn't answer immediately. He looked around the room. For once, it didn't feel too grand or too far out of reach. I guess we'll see where wishes take us, Anthony said, a small real smile breaking through. Christmas Eve arrived under a dusting of fresh snow inside their apartment, now much warmer thanks to a new heater Adrian had insisted on installing. Johnny sat on the edge of the bed. We have to go, Johnny said. I have to thank Santa. Anthony smiled. Because he sent Adrian. Johnny nodded. Yeah, that was the best present ever. That morning, an envelope had slipped under their door, cream-colored, handwritten, warm Christmas dinner. Just bring the ones you love most. Inside was a card printed with Johnny's sketch of the 3 of them. Adrian had framed the original. That evening, they arrived at Adrian's Penthouse, he was waiting downstairs. Johnny ran up and hugged him. I brought Dad's gift too, he said proudly. Adrian leaned down. Then I guess I get 2 presents tonight, upstairs. The apartment was modern but warm. Christmas tree glowed in the corner. Dinner was set out, pasta, salad and slightly burnt cookies Johnny had helped bake at Adrian's place the week before. Adrian bit into one and smiled. Perfect, Anthony raised an eyebrow. Really? Adrian grinned. Absolutely. After dinner, Adrian walked with Johnny to the tree. Johnny pulled out a folded piece of paper. I have one more thing, he whispered. Dear Santa, I think I already got my gift early, but if it's okay, can I keep him forever? Love. Johnny. Adrian read it slowly, his throat tightening. He looked at Johnny, then gently pulled him into a hug. Anthony stood nearby, watching. No one said anything grand, no speeches, just a shared moment beneath the lights. 1 year later, the city looked the same on the outside, but everything had changed. For Anthony, he was halfway through his nursing degree, top of his class. Johnny, now 17, was looking at art colleges. His respiratory health was managed perfectly. Life was still hard work, but it wasn't lonely. Adrian had stepped down from some of his administrative burdens to focus on patient care and a new foundation dedicated to helping single parents in medical crisis. At the annual hospital gala, Anthony stood on the main stage. When I was younger, he began, his voice steady. I thought asking for help was weakness, but I learned that letting someone in can make you stronger. He glanced toward the front row. Adrian sat beside Johnny, and sometimes, Anthony continued, looking directly at Adrian, love is just showing up day after day. Later that evening, the three of them walked beneath the lights of the city. Johnny ran ahead, texting a friend. Anthony and Adrian walked quietly behind him, their hands brushing. Anthony looked sideways at the doctor. If someday, he said slowly, I don't need help anymore, would you still stay? Adrian stopped, turning to face him. The cold wind blew against his gray coat, but his eyes were warm. Without hesitation, he reached out and took Anthony's hand. I'd stay, he said softly, not because you need me, but because I need you. Their fingers intertwined. Johnny turned around just then. Hey, are you guys coming? He shouted, grinning. Dad. Adrian. Anthony squeezed Adrian's hand. We're coming. Anthony called back. Thanks for watching. Subscribe, please.